had built an impressive career in the civil society, in journalism, and in politics. And after the invasion started, Vadym became one of the key spokespeople for the Ukrainian government. He is an advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, and wearing his second hat, Vadym is also the executive director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. And it's a very powerful Ukrainian think tank, which has brought together the best brains in different fields of study, and which is very resourceful to understand the current situation. We asked Vadym to talk on three specific subjects. First, it's Bucha, the Bucha massacre and the Russian atrocities. Second, Vadym will be prepared to talk about the battlefield situation around the country. And third, Vadym could talk about the impact of the economic sanctions on Russia. He will has his way how to make the best use out of the time that we have. And without further ado, please welcome Vadym Denysenko.
Dear friends, dear colleagues, let me say that I'm prepared to give the briefing in Ukrainian. Should you like an exclusive interview, I'm prepared to give them in English. So I need to start this conversation with Bucha. As the worst episode so far of this war, the war waged by Russia against Ukraine and the entire civilized world. To talk about Bucha specifically, it has to be made clear that Bucha isn't just the small town, a satellite town of Kyiv. It's a district incorporating about 25 settlements in total. So it's Bucha and the neighboring towns and villages. As of now, these territories had been under Russian occupation, were pummeled by Russian troops, the artillery, and then after the occupation, they came under the terror waged by the Russian servicemen. To begin, as of now, we can clearly state that in this district alone, more than 400 people were found dead. I'm saying 400 and more because by the hour new bodies are discovered, we discover new atrocities, we discover about new burials. To give you an understanding, there are many bodies that were lying openly in the street. No one had the opportunity to bury them, and many have been discovered already, but there are also mass graves. There are also graves that were improvised in their own yards, in some kindergarten, playgrounds, where they tried to bury those that were killed by the Russians. Now the locals who stayed in Bucha, in Hostomel, share that this is where we buried our neighbors after they were killed by the Russians. And this does happen in playgrounds or in the courtyards of the homes where those people used to live. There's a great number of victims, and they have been executed summarily, like the fascists and the NKVD did. These people had their hands bound behind their backs and they were shot in the back of their head. They were killed kneeling, like the fascists did, like the Soviet NKVD troops did. They tied their hands and shot them in the back of their head. We are also prepared to state that there is mounting testimony of rape. Many women are now testifying to the rapes they experienced. We hear the stories of rapes before the eyes of the children. We hear the stories of rape before the family members of these women and girls. Then many of such women and people who witnessed the atrocities were then murdered by the Russian soldiers. We also have the information about the killings of the children. Now we are amassing the facts, and there's just one reason to do so, because these crimes need to be punished. We need to present the evidence to the International Criminal Court, and we need to bring this case to completion, making sure that all the perpetrators of the executions are traced and brought to justice. It also needs to be stated that we find dead people, and we found many corpses of the animals, dogs mostly. There is a huge, massive number of animals shot and killed lying on the streets and the basement, etc., strewn around. Now the services are demining the area. As Russians retreated, they mined a lot of areas they were leaving. This morning in Bucha, over 1,000 explosives were found in Bucha that Russians used to mine the homes, the streets, and so on. Why we are preventing access to the civilians, saying this area is not inhabitable? Because so much has been mined. Just to give you an understanding, the doors into homes were mined so that people would detonate as they opened their home right on the threshold. They mined the basements. The Russians placed mines in the playgrounds, in the yards. So it's over 1,000 mines that have been eliminated in Bucha. Mining territories is part of the Russian modus operandi, and 80,000 square kilometers in Ukraine need to be demined in the future, because one way or another they contain explosives. I know you will have questions whether Bucha is a standalone case. It is not a standalone case. It is a part of the modus operandi of Russia in Ukraine. It's part of the Russian playbook. I know that the Russian Federation now is beginning to make a lot of fake publications alleging that it's the Ukrainian army that entered Bucha and started the atrocities. This is clearly a fake. It's an ungrounded lie. We know how long the bodies have been lying around. It's well documented. We are bringing in journalists for the world to see what has happened, and for Russians to have no theoretical possibility of push a counter narrative. It's a crime that the Russians had committed that will be proven in the international courts. Now we are clearing the neighboring regions, and we expect that similar stories, perhaps on a smaller scale, had happened in the nearby areas in Kyiv region. We are now seeing what happened in Sumy, Chernihiv regions, and I don't even want to think what's happening in Mariupol. You know that Russians are abducting people, forcibly deporting them into the territory of Russian Federation, and this is done explicitly for the reason to shoot TV footage for the Russian propaganda TV, for the Russian content, and to push some international stories where people would talk all kinds of nonsense that allegedly the Ukrainian army did to them in the settlements. It is a true genocide of the Ukrainian people. We will insist that these are not just war crimes. It's an attempt to wage genocide on the Ukrainian nation. Now, to talk about the situation in Ukraine, I have a thought. Perhaps should we take questions based on Bucha and the region? Are there any questions at this point, any clarifying questions about Bucha and the atrocity of the Russian invaders? And you will also be able to ask questions at the end. If no questions, we'll move to the next topic. The operational situation, the operational picture. There are two key strategies that Russia is pursuing at the moment. Firstly, the first one is well known. During the last 10-12 days, the Russians have been attempting to massively shell using their missiles the rear territories of Ukraine. Their key targets are foodstuff warehouses and oil reservoirs. They have a twofold aim: to demoralize the people, because when the sirens are blaring and air raids across the whole territory affect the people's morale one way or another. The second intent is to thwart us access to foodstuffs, to food commodities, and deny us access to oil products. They will fail there as well. But there is a third intent, and that is the intent to disrupt the sowing campaign in Ukraine, but I will address it later. To talk about the posture and the front and the developments on the front line, Russians feel that their key objectives for the moment are Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and they intend to pursue several goals. Firstly, it's the axis Izum-Volnovakha. Secondly, to attempt to reach Slaviansk. I will show it on the map in a minute. Thirdly, it's Popasna in Luhansk region and Kremina. And Rubizhne, again in Luhansk region. And thirdly, the city of Mariupol, where for 40 days they've been failing, but they continue terrorizing the city, continuing shelling the city. They have failed to seize Kharkiv, but they continue bombing Kharkiv with their warplanes and long-reach artillery to pummel the infrastructure. You will have heard the demands of the Russian Federation, the so-called denazification of Ukraine. They have no such intent. Their primary intent is to destroy the industry in Ukraine. One of the key objectives is to destroy the industrial and economic potential of Ukraine as a country. And this is their primary goal in this war. Secondly, to talk about the economic situation. So these are the key objectives in the front, to try to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Then they will try to move towards Kharkiv and southwards, but at this stage they are attempting to reach the administrative borders of the Donetsk and Luhansk region. In my opinion, the next 10 or 14 days will be decisive for this stage of the war and will define how far Russian ambition can go. Before that, their primary target was Kiev. No matter what you say now, they realized their plan was foiled, so therefore they withdrew their troops. They were at a stalemate, so that's why they retreated from Sumy, Chernihiv and Kiev regions and concentrated their troops in these directions, in the eastern directions, to try to fortify. The heaviest fighting is happening there, and this will define the course of this stage of war. To talk about the economic component, if there's a question about war, I'm ready to take it. So to talk about the economic war against Ukraine, we need to start with 2 points. First and most important point is the Black Sea blockage. This is needed to sever Ukrainian exports. For some commodities, Ukraine used to export up to 80% of their commodities by sea, and these are cereal crops. Without the port, without Odessa, and without the Azov Sea, we will lose out on our export potential, and this will be a powerful blow to the Ukrainian economy. We are aware that Currently, the losses of the Ukrainian GDP this year will reach 30 to 35%. That is a huge blow to our economy. And I was saying about the attempts to destroy infrastructure in Ukraine. This is an element of the war aimed to annihilate the infrastructure, the industry in Ukraine, and to decapitate its economy. Another spear of the attack is the disruption of the sowing campaign. Russia is waging a grain war on Ukraine and the entire world. A few days ago, the former president of Russian Federation and now the deputy head of the Security Council of Russian Federation, Dmitry Medvedev, confirmed my statement. We need to make it clear that as of now, in an ideal scenario, Ukraine will not be able to sow about 30-35% of its arable land. In the worst case scenario, half the arable land will not be sown. Ukraine is one of the key players on the grain markets of the world, and this is wheat, corn, and sunflower oil primarily. As of now, we can say that the Russian war is about disrupting our soil campaign so that the price on grain could rocket and the deficit on the global market can reach 25 million tons of grain in the next marketing year. This is part of the story. And the second part of the story is that the Russians, given the statement made by Medvedev, they're beginning to spin a story that you cannot sell Russian grain to the non-friendly countries, as they call them. By this, they are attempting to create price panic so that the price on grain would rocket. This is one of the key elements of this war. It's the so-called grain war. And finally, as the director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, we've conducted an extensive study. It's published on the website of our institute about the sanctions on the Russian Federation. As of now, we can clearly formulate the sanctions are not effective and will not bring a change of regime in Russia. Moreover, currently, owing to the high prices on oil and gas, and oil primarily, as oil comprises 30% of the Russian Federation budget. The high prices on oil permit Russians to balance their budget and also to keep a profit in the trade balance of the Russian Federation the next year and a half or two if the sanctions are not imposed with greater severity through the oil embargo in full, or at least partial embargo on Russian oil. The Putin's regime in economic terms faces no trouble whatsoever and will not face any jeopardy. Every month they receive a profit of roughly $20-25 billion a month. $20-25 billion a month at the current oil prices. So for these considerations, the sanctions are paid for, but they will need 10 years to kick in. Then Russia will begin to retard. But with the prospect of this year, the decline in the Russian GDP will comprise, depending on a variety of circumstances, from up to 12% only. I know for the civilized country that would be a hard hit and people would start rebelling. But for the Russian Federation, and having high means because of its sovereign funds to cater to the poorest groups of population, sanctions will not hit Russian Federation to such a degree that the Putin's regime would begin to crumble. And I thank you for your attention. I'm ready to take your questions now. You're welcome. you work for the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. Where can Ukraine expect help to rebuild its economy and to make progress? We don't have a special opinion. It has to be foreign aid. We will need substantial foreign aid to help rebuild and modernize Ukrainian economy. Secondly, we need to preserve, and this is critically important, we need to preserve our own manufacturing potential wherever possible. We've analyzed the countries that have been through the experience of such conflicts like Syria, Iraq, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Yemen, and all of them share a problem. They had to face the reconstruction, influx of imports, and they lost the cluster of their domestic economy, and this exacerbated the economic crisis even further. So we believe there are three important vectors we need to address. Firstly, preserve domestic manufacturing as far as it is possible, and there we will need to talk about governmental protection as the key instrument, as the government will be the key primary investor. We need to make it clear. Government will rebuild the country first and foremost. So the government needs to offer protection to the domestic businesses and their localization. Secondly, it's stimulation of exports. Even if tomorrow a miracle should happen and starting tomorrow the war should end, during the next year we will not have any chance to export by sea because Russians have mined the Black Sea. Importantly, and to demine the Black Sea, it will take at best 6 months, or it could be well into 9 or 12 months. No insurance company will cover the risk of the ships. So we need to stimulate export and orient it westward. And thirdly, we need to have a very balanced support of the countries that will be ready to stand with us after our victory. In your opinion, how much time will be needed to rebuild the economy, and when can we get back to the status of the 23rd of February? How long will we need to go back to the pre-war level? It's hard to tell you the answer because war is not over. We don't know when where the front is going to end. How will the war end? To say that we are facing a decline of 35% of GDP this year, so to restore the economy of the country given the best conditions, we will need at least 3 or 4 years. And these are the best case scenarios. And also like to make it clear that after that, after victory, we will need to rewire the way the government is run. The existing structure of governance that has been in place for the last 30 years cannot remain productive for the future. Next week we are publishing a major report about what the country needs to do after our victory, and one of the key points is a point on governments. It's not those who have most resources that win, but those that are best organized. We need to rewire the way we govern our country.
George Young from Australia, and how are you? Thank you. And obviously, there's a big trouble for your export right now. And how do you think your country can export your products overseas and import as well? Because your port have a problem right now.
Дякую за це запитання.
Thank you for this question. I would like to reiterate once again. In the nearest year, after the completion of the war, Ukraine will not be able to resume its export by sea, the Black Sea nor the Azov Sea. This will not be able to happen because of insurance risk, because Russia has heavily mined the water of the Black Sea along the Ukrainian coast. In the last month, there were 2 incidents, one close to the Bosphorus Strait, the second in the waters close to Romania, the Black Sea coast of Romania, again close to Bosphorus, where mines were discovered. No insurance company will be prepared to finance the insurance of the vessels for them to go into the Ukrainian ports and export products from there. So unfortunately, when we talk about the rebuilding of the Ukrainian economy, there should be a separate point of international assistance to demine the waters of the Black Sea and the Azov Sea, and it will not just be our territorial waters, but it will pertain to mine sweeping across the entire Black Sea because of the mines laid by the Russian Federation in the Black Sea. And how can we export? The experts have to be rewired towards the western borders. That's a primary objective. A lot of coordination is needed with all the countries that we share the western borders with. And in theory, we could be considering a potential export through the Danube ports onwards to Europe and then by sea. But this is a theoretical possibility only at this point because the insurance companies are considering our Danube ports, Ismail and Kiliki, they are considered as risky. Where can we read your report about the alternative mode of governance? It's on the website of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. We plan to upload it next Tuesday on Wednesday, and it will also be in the English translation. More questions? We can go back to earlier topics or start the individual interviews. We understand that Mr. Denysenko is prepared to address a wide range of questions pertaining to the situation in the front and the massacres committed by the Russian invaders. I have a question about the short-term future. What topics should the journalists be following? What's your advice for foreign mass media? What are the key topics for them to keep in sight? Well, unfortunately, the key topic is what's going to unravel in the eastern part of Ukraine. This will be the key development for the next 2 or 3 weeks. This will be the key battle of this stage of the war, or perhaps even the entire war, because when the Russians had to retreat from Kiev north of Ukraine, their prime objective is to demonstrate to their Russian people that they have achieved some success, at least somewhere. So they will do everything they can. They will resort to all tactics, including illegal tactics, to make any achievements in the eastern part of Ukraine. The second topic to follow will be the atrocities committed by the Russian troops in the occupied territories. There will be daily developments, and the Ukrainian president and the prosecution office and the police and all the agencies will cover the topic. Day by day, we will remind the world of the genocide of the Ukrainian nation. And the third topic to follow is the economic topic, because it's economy, and economy again, because without economy, any progress will be severely hampered. And of course, the deliveries of weaponry to Ukraine. One of the key challenges of Ukraine is heavy weaponry. Until we receive heavy weaponry, it would be very difficult for us to defeat our foe. If we had more heavy weaponry, the situation would be very difficult. The posture would be drastically different at the fronts. This is the 41st day of invasion, and this is my last question to you, perhaps. If we asked you what are the most memorable points of the 40 days, what images will you see before your eyes? What will be the memories that come to mind? Of which days? It's day one for sure, and we will once write a novel about the first day of war. There are many names, there are many events that would go in, and the second day is when we realized that they have lost their battle for Kyiv. This was and is a major victory. Even Russians would like to present it as if they are withdrawing, regrouping. They had reached a stalemate. So this is the reason they are fleeing from Sumy, Chernihiv and Kyiv, and of course Bucha and Mariupol. These are two pressure points we'll never forget. There's also Chernihiv and Kharkiv and Ochtyrka. I love Chernihiv, but I'm certain that the battle for Mariupol and the way Ukraine has defended Mariupol will make history of the wartime strategy for the next centuries to come. It's a history of 300 supporters which stretch over 40 days and will continue on and on. Thank you. Vadym Denysenko, advisor to the Minister of Interior of Ukraine and Executive Director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. As we've said, Mr. Denysenko will stay